Okay, we are in the discussion of AWS Solutions Architect, and I'm going to start a new topic, which is Identity and Access Management, IAM. This one is going to be a global type topic. I'm going to discuss in a way that I think it's useful. Uh, might have to do few videos or probably won't be able to finalize it in a one video. Anyway, let's get it started and we'll go through uh, once we know this concept and we can go through other topic as well. So let's start with the identity and access management. So that is in a short form what we call IAM. So it's anything I say is IAM, right? So let's start at simply the purpose is control who, authentication, can do what, authorization in AWS. Mainly the component going to be manage users, groups, roles and policies, right? So authentication means identifying the user, and then after identifying, authorization means what are the resources, and on that resources, what can authenticated user can do. So basically, there are some diagrams. So here, a user or client. So this who it can be a actual user or it can be a service. Let's say easy to instance, need to access saved logs in a S3 bucket. So then that's machine easy to going to be using credentials, whatever as act as authentication part in there, and then that normally called a role, right? Uh, now, in that diagram, so user or client use credentials to authentication, and then IAM service checks the authentication, and once authentication finalized, then it will check policies and roles and identify what sort of services that authenticated user allowed to access and what sort of actions authenticated user can perform on the resources which is allowed to access. All right, let's briefly identify the key component IAM. So we'll go through this one. So the first component is users. They are actual users. So users represent a person or service that interact with AWS. User can be an actual person or can be a service which is interact with the AWS service, right? Uh, Users can be assigned credentials, password for console, access key for CLI or API. So CLI means command line interface. So API is application programming interface, right? The best practice is create individual users instead of sharing credentials. So In user case, that's the best practice. And then we go into the groups. The groups are a collection of IAM users. So the users needed the same sort of permissions. We use multiple users, right? That's easy to handle. So what we do, if users are doing the same sort of task, and then we can create a group. So once user assigned to that group, the group got a permission what actions the group can do. So need to remember the groups can't be nested. No groups within the groups. You can't create a group and you can't create a subgroup or like sort of things in a group, right? And then we move into roles. Role is an IAM identity with permission but no credentials. Used to delegate access to. So this one is identity with permissions but no credentials. So they can be services, sort of services like EC2 Lambda, federated users, right? SAML, OIDC, or cross-account access. That means these ones, like federated users, I'm going to explain in next slide. The users, they don't have actual credentials inside the IAM services, but federated users use external credentials to use services inside the AWS. And then temporary security credentials are provided when assumed, right? So they will be used at different external authentication, but once they log in, will be using a temporary security credentials uh, provided when assumed, right? When then once they log off, that will cancel that temporary credentials. So then, apart from this key component, we got policies. Policies are JSON document that define permissions, right? Policies can be attached to users, groups, or roles. So we're going to discuss two types of policies. Uh, Managed policies that can be again divided by two, the AWS managed policies or customer managed policies. And then the other type is inline policies. The inline policies are embedded directly into a user or group or a role, right? All right. So policies usually use JSON document type. We're going to look into this syntax of these policies. We're going to do more sort of hands-on in when we progress into when we're looking into policies. All right. So the right-hand side, so you've got the different policy types, right? So policy types are identity-based policies, right? So these identity-based policies are attached to IAM identities, that's users, groups, and roles. So that policy is included to what actions and the identity can perform, right? So these policies, identity-based policies, contains what actions this identity the user can perform, right? So they can be managed or they can be inline. All right. Second type of policies is attached to resources, resource-based policies. So they can be attached to the buckets, SOS queues, easy to instances like that. So resource-based policies specify who can access the resource and what they can do. So that policies contain the details of who can access the resources and what can do they do on resources, right? So example, S3 bucket policy. So you can create a bucket policy and you can tell in that policy what sort of users that can be accessed and what sort of actions that can be done inside the bucket, right? Like what are the things you can do, perform. And then you got another mm, policy called permission boundaries. So advanced feature to set maximum permissions for IAM entities. So it doesn't grant permissions, but set the maximum possible, right? So will these are going to set up a maximum possible permission, just like a boundary line, what they can do. Then next one is organizations service control policies, SCP. Service control policies are top level policies applied to AWS organizations accounts, right? That will be applied into organization, just like let's say you want to put something like some sort of policy like multi-factor authentication. We're going to talk about multi-factor authentication, right? That's actually to give access to AWS authentication. We're going to use more than more than two methods for checking validity, right? So service control policies are applied to organization accounts, act as guardrails for what actions are allowed in a member accounts, right? Doesn't grant permission but sets limits. So it doesn't give you permission, but you can perform restricted limit sets, right? For sort of conditions. And then they got something called access control list, ACLs. So it's a legacy way of controlling cross-account access to resources, right? Less flexible than resource-based policies, right? It's still used in S3 for some scenarios, right? The major ones are identity-based, resource-based, permission boundaries, and organization uh, service control policies. But access control list is still some of S3 buckets. They've been used just to keep remember. All right. Before we moving towards in this IAM, right? Just need to understand few words we're going to use because these words going to be used in there. And once I use these words, you just need to understand what does this word say. So I'm going to explain few different words we're going to use in here. So the one of the things we're going to discuss with these policies and IAM is federation authentication, right? So we got a few federation. Federation means we're going to use external identities to access AWS resources securely through trusted identity providers and standardized authentication formats. So there are some standardized authentication formats for federation access, and federation means you can use external identity to access AWS. Let's say one of the user he doesn't have actual login username or password into login into one of these resources, right? But they can be granted to use their external login like a Gmail login, Facebook login, sort of a third party identity providers. You can use them to authenticate into some of the resources inside the AWS. That is we call federation, right? So in this federation, there are some standard formats you have. So one of the standard format is SAML2, SAML. That's called security, a certain markup language, right? So the security a certain markup language enables single sign-on between enterprise identity providers and AWS, right? Allows role-based federation without creating IAM users. So they can be assigned to a role-based federation without creating IAM users inside uh, AWS. So you can use your Gmail, you can use your Facebook or something like to logging into a AWS role, right? With using the federation. And then second type of um, standard identity is JSON Web Tokens. We call JWT. Right? Uh, that's used by Amazon Cognito and other OIDC providers, right? Contains encoded user claims and is signed to ensure integrity. So JSON Web Templates also we're going to use, right? That contain encoded user claims and is signing up and is signed to ensure the integrity with the AWS. So when I'm talking about federation, these are the things we're going to talk about, right? And then you got another uh, type called AWS STS tokens, right? These STS tokens are temporary credentials generated by AWS Security Token Service, STS, Security Token Service, for short-term access. So short-term access include access keys, secret key, and a session token. So these three types sort of things can be used, and these are sort of words we're going to use in the future. When I talk in this one, you should have an idea, right? AWS authentication workflow. So identity provider, SAML, a certain language, right? JWT access token, right? SAML token, right? AWS STS, and gives the authorize. So give user backup security credentials, right? So authorization flow, authentication flow, then authorization flow, right? And then token exchange, right? So once they try to log in user with the identity provider, and then they giving you a temporary credentials, and then you can log into these resources, right? So additional authentication format. So OAuth 2.0 tokens used for authorization flows with the web application. So OAuth 2.0, remember, they can be used in authorization flows with web application. So you want to authenticate web through web application. So you can use OAuth2 tokens, right? And then X.509 certificates. So mutual TLS authentication with AWS IoT and other devices. So TLS authentication, you can use X509 certificates, right? And then assume role response contains temporary credentials after successful role assumption. So that assume role response, so that one has also a temporary credentials. So mostly these ones are given mostly for while they log in, and then once you are used and the session is over, most of them are um, temporary, right? So what I explained, some of the words I've been using in the future, so you to understand some of them are sort of things they're using for federation, right? So federation authentication workflow, just to uh, more just explanation. Let's have a look. A- AWS Federation Authentication workflow. So, what is federation? Federation means the external identities will be using in to get access to AWS resources, right? So, federation authentication methods, right? So, federation authentication methods are SAML2, right? Security Assertion Markup Language. I'm not going to tell again and again. So, SAML, right? Going to tell. So, um, enterprise identity federation supporting single sign-on. Single sign-on means once you sign on, you can use in different programs. You don't need to log in into a few different times to use different programs. So that is called single sign-on, right? Uh, JWT tokens, JSON Web Token for OAuth 2 OIDC workflows. JSON Web Tokens mostly used in a web type. STS, Secure Token Service, issues temporary credentials. STS, right? So authentication flow, right? What is the authentication flow? So user authenticate with identity provider, right? Identity provider like a Gmail, Facebook, or sort of, I don't know, anything, right? And IDP issue SAML a certain or JWT. So then once identity provider can give you a SAML or JWT, right, token, and then token exchange with AWS STS, then they will use that token to AWS STS security token service, and then AWS security token service gives a temporary AWS credential, right? Once we got temporary credentials, right? User can give that temporary credentials back to a resource, whatever it's granted, and it's going to use, right? So in this picture, you can see that. So see that. So external identity provider, you try to log in using external identity provider, right? They say use Gmail, your Gmail account, username and password. And then external identity provider, it gives you a SAML or JWT token. and then that will pass to AWS Security Token Service, STS. Then STS gives you back a temporary AWS credentials, and then you use these temporary credentials to use the services in AWS, right? So once you log off, probably going to get rid of this one. So once in the session, once you log in, it's available, and then once you log off, you go off, right? So key benefits in these scenarios, right? So it's got a centralized identity management, use existing directories. So it will give you a temporary credentials. So when you give with temporary credentials, it's an enhanced security posture, right? You will not be given a long-term credential you can use again. So simplified access, no IAM user needed for each employee. So you don't need to provide the actual inside IAM user account and password, and then standards based, right? So interoperability with many IDPs. So mostly a lot of things like in a Gmail, Facebook, right? YouTube, sort of a common thing. Everyone has a account of these things. So that's the the easiness to use in the way, right? So this is just going to quickly looking into this slide, right? And again, we're going to uh, just refresh Federation for Solution Architect Federation. So what is AWS Federation? If I tell you Federation, this is what it is. Understand? So in the future, so I don't want to explain. So Federation allows external identity to access AWS resources without IAM user. So again, you don't need to be a IAM user to use resources. So you can use external identity, right? So temporary credentials instead of permanent access keys. You will be given a temporary credentials, right? Each time when you log in. Integration with the corporate identity providers. A lot of identity providers it will integrate with, right? It supports SAML 2.0 and OpenID Connect method, right? So again, I explained this one itself properly previous slides. So users try with uh, login through identity providers. So then identity provider will give you temporary identity credential, right? From STS service back, and then you provide that STS, and you're going to use um, that temporary credentials to use. So users authenticate with identity providers. So you log in and authenticate to your Facebook or Gmail, and then IDP provide a temporary credential through Federation. So through the Federation, you're going to get uh, temporary credentials from STS, and then users access AWS resources using that federated temporary identity. So federation methods, SAML2, right? Security asset and markup language, enterprise identity providers, so SAML method, web identity federation, social identity providers, right? AWS SSO, centralized access management, custom identity broker, so non-standard provider. So in here, you can see security level, implementation complexity, scalability, right? So just gives you a sort of an idea uh, of much good. Mm. So see that is it so single sign-on, right? Security level is high, right? Nearly 10. Implementation and complexity is medium, right? And scalability is also high, right? AWS single sign-on and SAML federation got better than SSO. So custom IDP, so bit of a complexity to set up, and then web identity federation, SAML, sorry, I think JWT can be used as web identity federation. So medium, right? Scalability is good, right? And then IAM users, right? IAM users are less sort of security level and less sort of scalability. So that's give you a sort of idea how they going to work, right? I think let's continue this discussion conversation of AWS Solution Architect from next video. Until then, thank you very much.